Well, here we are, closing out Season 1. Ellen has been knocked out by the sudden takeoff of Apollo 24 that sent them off course and killed poor Harry. Deke is on his way out, too. His suit has a hole, so he's leaking air, and the abort isn't working. And I have to say, I really hope they put that Equal Rights Amendment to good use if they're screwing astronauts over this badly with the defective junk that they're making. Ellen eventually helps Deke get back to the entrance and repressurizes, only the reason he knows there's a hole in his suit is because a sharp piece of metal has put it there, and it's still there, on account of being embedded in his torso. So, things could be better. After the titles, Kennedy yells at the head of NASA because of the unconscionable way they keep having accidents, which has nothing to do with him. He will not hear a word spoken against Calculometer 2000, the finest computer to come out of Idaho. And of course, Ed's still stuck on the moon. But if you've been wondering, he didn't kill that cosmonaut. He just did that to knock the guy out so he could be restrained before he comes to. Ed questions him, but the guy says he's got every right to go where he wants on the moon. Nothing belongs to anyone up here. All property is theft, man. The cosmonaut warns that his friends are going to come for him, but Ed points out that's crap. They only have one rover, and he sabotaged it. No one is going to stroll down here. So, no, my good cosmonaut friend, I'm afraid it's just you, me, and this Teach Yourself the Accordion in 30 Days tape. Meanwhile, Apollo 25 successfully splashes down, but there's still no contact with Apollo 24, still on a trajectory for deep space. Ellen patches Deke up, who is in an overall awful mood, having also witnessed Harry's terrible end. They drop their trailer like it was a millionaire patent troll who lied about their zombie bite, but whether they can correct now, it's going to be a tough one. Speaking of tough, while Aleda's father isn't being charged with espionage or anything, he is being sent back to Mexico. He calls to say he'll send money to take care of her, but after taking that on board, she heads over to NASA to see what's happening in person. What's happening is that Deke and Ellen are trying to slow their out-of-control craft, but it burns through everything they have, all the fuel, and it's still not enough. But there is one positive. It lets NASA know they're alive and that they're trying. Margot's team has figured out that, yes, they're going too fast. All the moon's gravity will do is alter their trajectory, not pull them into orbit. But she has a plan, which is great. But it requires Ed picking up the phone, which is not great. All he's doing is trying to get answers out of the cosmonaut on what's going on in their corner of magnificent desolation. The cosmonaut won't answer questions, but he is trying to prey on Ed's emotional state, bringing up his own daughter. Ed doesn't believe his story about his daughter being sick while a baby. So when that doesn't work, the Russian decides to go for provocation, that Ed's on a course of action that will only end in murdering him. Ed won't entertain that thought, though.
This is America, I said.
Now, a good beating, on the other hand. Meanwhile, Margot hears what's up with Aleda, and she feels bad for her. Aleda asks if she can stay with Margot.
I promise I won't be a bother. You won't even notice I'm there.
You won't need to start any fires for me. I could do them all myself. Margot explains that she just can't do that. Aleda's going to have to stay where she is. Except the feds stopped by and everyone's gone and the place is sealed up. When her dad calls and finds out, he says to get out, never go back, and wait for money to buy a bus ticket for Mexico. She doesn't want to go, so she lies and says she's staying with Margot. This has got wacky sitcom moment all over it. Meanwhile, hurtling towards deep space...
It's not the worst way to go.
Yeah, I'd pick this over Harry's exit. Even if that was fast, it has to suck to be incinerated alive. But what's worse is, after musing about their fate to get farther in the universe than anyone, they realize Deke's got internal bleeding from his wound, and that's something they can't treat. But now, knowing that he's screwed, Deke comments that Ellen had a bit of John Glenn in her, and they spend this time talking about personal stuff, about Deke and his wife, about her marriage to Brock, and finally, she decides to admit the truth. Deke laughs, thinking that she's joking about screwing the bartender, until he sees she's serious. He does not react well, and we'll leave it at that for right now. After a check-in on Karen, we return to Ed's moon base where the lights are flickering and the cosmonaut is singing quietly to himself. After shooting the shit while Ed looks things over, the cosmonaut notes that the lights are forming a pattern, the SOS signal. And Ed's like, oh, yeah, the hundreds of pages of instructions from NASA that I've been ignoring. While he looks into that, Karen finally visits the bar the astronauts go to and talks to the bartender who's worried about Ellen. Karen complains about the bullshit rules of being a NASA astronaut wife, but the bartender, who can't actually be one, doesn't entertain that pity party. But when she realizes Karen's married to Ed Baldwin, okay, maybe she has a right to complain that her husband has been stuck on the moon this whole time. But Ed's the key to the plan to save Apollo 25. He's going to head up in that next-gen LEM of theirs, dock with a command module, slow it down enough to fall into orbit, and Bob's your uncle.
If this doesn't happen within the window, Ellen and Deke will just keep drifting off into deep space.
Which we have to avoid at all costs, as Werner von Braun told me, Deep Space 9. But the problem is fuel. This craft was made to go up and come down, not act like a set of brakes. But there's still fuel left in the remains of the LEM from Apollo 15 that they can use. And while they figure out how they might make that work, the crew of Apollo 25 return, and Molly wants to talk to Margot. Not about ordering leaving her behind. Molly's a grown-up and understands. No, she thinks she saw where the damage happened when the two were colliding, and it's why the long-range communication isn't working. But the short-range should. So while she files that away, Ed has to make the rough call about rescuing 25. As the cosmonaut notes, he can't do this job by himself in the amount of time that he's got. He also notes that regardless of any rivalries, international law is to help any ship in distress, so he's obligated to help Ed. I guess Ed agrees because faster than you can sing Mamushka, the two are out on the rover getting the fuel tanks. Ed gives him back the missing part of his rover as a way of saying thanks and watch what neighborhood you park in next time, buddy. Well, while the mood is grim on Apollo 24, even as Ellen helps Deke eat, there's a tension there that, well, there won't be any rainbow pride parades on this trip. But the sound of a voice on the radio is super welcome relief. But while the fact somebody's up there is reassuring, the plan has a snag because Houston didn't know about one thing. By burning all of their fuel in a desperate attempt to stop themselves, there was nothing left for maneuvering thrusters in order to stop their tumble. You can't dock with a tumbling spacecraft. It's like trying to tie a bow tie on a stumbling drunk. You gotta stop them first. As far as the observation room for mission control, Brock is unnerved that the bartender joined Karen. Thinks it's going to raise suspicion, but all she cares about right now is whether or not Ellen survives to come home again. Up on Apollo 24, as the two are being suited up, Deke tells Ellen something. It's not that he's sorry he feels the way he does about her sexuality. Rather, it's about how he feels about her as an astronaut. Whatever else, she has in her the capacity to do great things. And while he wouldn't allow his views about her sexuality to stop her from making full use of her talents, he knows, as he puts it, there's too many people like him out there for her to ever reveal the truth. She needs to keep this as a secret so that her talent will be able to take her as far as he knows they can. It's a complicated thing. Hollywood has a very bigoted and offensive past, and so they often overcompensate to the point of absurdity. I mean, you'll wind up with people who lived 1,000 years ago, and on a hunt they let the animal get away in keeping with the sensibilities of today, and with no regard for how past people would be starving if they did that. I mean, you'll practically get a character who in the midst of the Norman conquest takes time out to recycle. So, while the temptation is to make historical characters have the same sensibilities of today, it's often unrealistic to expect it of every character. This seems like it might be a reasonable compromise on that. Deke shows attitude that is typical of his day, yet also still believes in Ellen's capacity for greatness in spite of that. He doesn't approve of what she does. He finds it distasteful, probably. But he doesn't allow that particular aspect of her personal life to overshadow all of the potential that she has as a person. Well, Ellen agrees with Deke on one point, that there's no way they're solving the docking problem in the next 20 minutes. But what if instead of docking, Ed throws the fuel to her and they just use their own engines to solve the problem? Margot approves, but the head of NASA doesn't.
I'm not going to stand here and let
This is my call. I'm in command here. So you can either stay out of my way or you can fuck right off. Those are your options.
And Von Braun thought she wasn't a team player. So Ed decouples the tank and throws it. Here's the thing, though. As I've said many times about going to space, it's all about weight. It's not all about mass. The distinction is that what matters for getting up off the surface is the need to overcome an opposing force. That's key. Weight is a measure of force. Mass comes in independent of weight when you're in a situation like here, where the forces are balanced, so any force that you apply to it will have some effect. It may not be much, but it will be something. Likewise, if you want to stop a moving object, that takes an opposing force. For both these, mass is what matters. So while Ed can throw the tank, it's not effortless just because he's in space. There's no gravity that he has to worry about, but the larger the mass, the less the acceleration, the less speed you're left with once you've let go of it. Ditto when it comes to stopping it. As an example, when I was in high school, my dad was putting the boat out in the water, and I was on the dock holding the rope tied to the front. Only the knot lived up to its name. It was not a knot, just an amazing imitation of a knot. So as the rope just disconnected from the boat, I lunged and grabbed the front of it. But the inertia was such that without any bracing, the boat just dragged me off the dock, dangling from the front like the world's ugliest mermaid. For that reason, when the shot misses, Ellen jumps after it, but snags the tank with the hook and line, resisting the urge to grab it. This does yank her right off the line, but she manages to grab onto the tank, and slowing her own mass is a lot easier than a big-ass fuel tank. The good news doesn't last long, though. Deke succumbed to his injuries while she was out, leaving her as the last survivor of Apollo 24. And it means that Marge, the alpha of the astronaut wives, breaks down at what she no doubt thought would never happen. Karen is right there, though, and gives her a shoulder to cry on. Deke is buried on the moon, but the question now is whether Ed stays or goes.
No, you can't expect to hold to the mission now. You'd be alone.
You were.
Yeah, but after his fellow astronauts returned home safely, not after one had to be buried out front and the other cooked by his own rocket. And being alone and grieving on the moon, that's not a great combination, he knows firsthand. Still, he's also been up here for so damn long that he probably should go before he winds up as space happy as Gordo was. So while Ed heads home, Ellen is asked via TV to talk about Deke and about how there are risks, but they're worth it. And after the credits, we skip ahead to 1983 and...
2, 1, ignition.
Plus, they also had Rubik's Cubes, too.